good Rufus R. Freight Train Jones stories?
Rufus Jones?
Rufus.
No, is Rufus. That's what Lawler said. Rufus R. Jones was actually, as a babyface in the early 70s in the Tennessee Territory, especially in Memphis, he was featured quite prominently. And actually the first time, I'm going to say one of the first times, not the first time, but one of the first times that I saw Lawler defend a Southern title was against Rufus R. Jones. I think it was on my birthday in 1974, as a matter of fact. Going to have to go back and check my book. But, the matches weren't good. He was not a great worker per se, but he was great at being Rufus R. Jones. And his promos made Ahmed Johnson sound something like Samuel L. Jackson or Lawrence Fishburne, in that they weren't really English. And that's why Lawler would make fun of him. Oh, Rufus R. Jones, 'cause every time he'd talk, and I mean, his lips would flap and spit would fly, and he'd get fired up, especially when he was mad at the fucking heel or whatever, but the people believed him. And they believed in him, and he was big. He was 260, 270, and not a great physique, but he was big enough to move people around. And he drew a good bit of money for a lot of the 70s, especially in the Southern Territories, where they had a lot of black audiences. And he was over with them because he was like their neighbor, the guy that lived down the street, old Rufus, Rufus off Freight Train Jones, and so that's back when people didn't care how good a babyface looked physically, or they didn't even care if he was a great wrestler. If they liked him, they wanted to see him beat the heels, and they liked Rufus R. Jones, and they wanted to see him beat the heels.
You could not understand a word he said.
Not a word.
I have one where he calls Jake Roberts, Jake the Snake Robbins. It always cracks me up. And
Jake the Snake Robbins. Rufus R. Jones are going to hit up with the freight train.
And it's top two, man. Get one, man.
That's top two, man. Top two in him.
I forgot. Yeah, he did have a little bit of a run in Memphis.
Oh, my God. Yeah, a couple of different times. Yeah. And actually, he was usually he'd come in, he'd have a short program with the top heel, but then he'd go into a tag team. He and Bobo Brazil were a team one time, and they were Southern Tag Team champions. But especially Rufus was big in Memphis in '74, so he was on a lot of huge cards because obviously he was either working with or underneath Lawler, and that was Lawler's pretty much biggest run ever. So a lot of people in Memphis still remember the Freight Train.